Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it going? And shalom, welcome to Liberty and Friends, your weekly, and I mean it, weekly news roundup show here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Very, very good to be with all of you tonight, as usual, on Liberty and Friends. This is the one long format show that I have every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. It's about a 90-minute show, so buckle up, get a warm drink, because it is, the season's clearly changing. And I do suggest to get something warm, because I can tell you now, the list of guests that I have tonight will definitely fire up this conversation. Before I get into any of that, a reminder to you, please, as you join us on the stream, smash that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, and don't forget to hit that bell notification so that you are notified every time a show goes on. If you want to support the Big Daddy Liberty Show, I've gone solo, so I definitely do need your contributions. For those of you who are contributing, all of that information, is in the descriptor of this video, whether you're watching on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook. Again, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Let's get the show going after this short message. I did mean short. Welcome back. I have a special panel of guests tonight. Man, tonight's going to be lit, as the young ones say. With that being said, let me introduce my first guest, just first on my little tab screen here. Pardon me, dear viewer, if you see me looking down every now and then. My computer screen where I control all of this is now here. With that being said, my first guest is a chap who has been on the show before. That, of course, is Mr. Chris Hattingh, is an assistant director at the Free Market Foundation. Chris, hey, ta-da! Welcome to it, brother. How are you doing?
So, Bona Sihle, how are you, sir?
I am good, my brother. Welcome to it. Welcome to it. Another guest who I think he's a new face. No, he's not. I've had him on the show before, quite a while back. It was actually during the hard lockdown, #end lockdown, #lockdowns are trash. A familiar face in that regard, Hugo Kruger. Hugo, hey man, how you doing? Hugo, your sound is off. I'm gonna give Hugo a moment.
Can you hear me now?
There he is. Hugo, hey man, how you doing, brother?
Yeah, good and yourself, and hello to the audience.
Excellent. Welcome to it. Another familiar face, someone who is, I can actually quite safely say, is now a regular here on Liberty and Friends, a sharp legal mind, someone I know you guys love hearing from. Nzuzo, Khathi. Nzuzo, welcome to the show, Maputi. How are you?
I'm good, and you, man? Great to be on the show on this cold winter night. But yeah, happy to be here and happy to be on Liberty and Friends. Thank you for having me.
Excellent, my brother. Welcome to it. Nzuzo, of course, is one part of the Manpatria trio, if I can call it that. Manpatria, of course, a podcast which I really encourage you guys to check out. Last, but definitely not least, and I do think it is the first time having him on as a guest panelist, but I do know he has been interviewed here on the BDL show, talking, of course, about Ernst Roets from Afriforum. Ernst, good evening.
Hey, Sihle, good to be on the show. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be part of the discussion. And good evening to all the viewers as well.
Excellento. Good to have you on. Fellas, welcome to the show. We're going to hop straight into it. Remember, Liberty and Friends is the show that looks at the news week that was. You know, the top headlines, what we discuss, provide analysis, opinion, and of course, some of you guys are ardent writers, and we will do links at the end to how people can reach you. Top of mind for me this week is one which I'll begin on a lighter note, excuse the pun, and you'll get it just now. The South African Post Office is trying to get the South African Post Office is trying to assert a monopoly on what would be the delivery of packages in this country that are under a kilogram. Now, this has implications, of course, to not just what we traditionally assume what are delivered by the post office, letters and, and the like. But it has massive implications, including, for example, what Uber Eats brings to your door. Chris, I'm going to begin with you because I know we've had a conversation around the absolute asinine nature of politicians trying to deliver basically anything, any service in a society, let alone as a monopoly.
Well, there's a tip for the viewers and listeners. One way to get around this is to just put bricks in your parcels, and then you'll get over the 1 kg limit. So then the post office won't have the monopoly on your parcels anymore. So that's a one workaround. I mean, that's what tends to happen with insane regulations. We saw this last year in hard lockdown with the alcohol ban, for example. You force people to be innovative in some ways, but you also force them to find other ways to simply get around the system. So that's what's going to happen. I mean, on these kinds of shows, we like to talk about the quote unquote big issues, for example, NHI, expropriation, South African Airways, why these things indicate to us how much the South African state is flailing. I think you can look at the small things now, for example, with the post office. That to me indicates a failing state when they try and enforce now a monopoly in terms of the weight of parcels, certain category that can be delivered by them and which may not be delivered by others. And as you rightly point out, we can look at the downstream consequences. You can worry about things like taking delivery of your medical drugs, for example, if the post office doesn't deliver that in time. It's simply a case of opening it up to market forces. And if the post office has this monopoly, we will see the inevitability of a lack of service delivery, as we see with all other SOEs in the country.
Absolutely. Ernst, let me come to you because this is currently before the courts. With the private courier sector, broadly speaking, which is a sector that's, sort of estimated around, it's a 20 billion rand industry, fighting the South African Post Office in court, trying to obviously, not have this decision put forward. Let me just read a quick provision here, just to set the stage, on what basis the Post Office argues that it has an exclusive right. It cites the South African Post Office Act, which regulates the operations of unreserved postal services, or UPS as the acronym goes, and which they argue applies to all private courier companies in South Africa. The arguments or the basis of their monopoly, they argue, is that SAPO, or the post office, is the only licensed reserve post service operator, and they argue that under this act, it should have exclusive rights to deliver this package. Now, the short story is really this, and Chris has already set the scene. There are people now, and there's one particular person, a friend of mine who's watching, who's probably pulling out what is the last of their hairs, because they've been waiting for a parcel to arrive. It was meant to take a couple of weeks, if anything, and it's going on, I think, 6 to 8 months now that they've been waiting on this. Talk to me about the sheer nature and the insidious nature, really, of an entity like the Post Office trying to use law or trying to hide behind the law to effectively enact a monopoly for itself.
Yes, I think that's exactly the point, and this is what you get to when you fall into this whirlpool of statism. So basically, the argument is that the post office needs this monopoly because there's some government regulation that says so, not because it's common sense, not because it's going to be more efficient, not because it's good for the country, but because of some regulation that they're quoting, as if regulations are there to change reality. We're not going to change the reality which is that these government industries and SEOs and all of these are failing for a variety of reasons. And the more they have this monopoly, the more it's going to fail. And again, it's ironic that this whole monopoly capital issue that we often hear the ANC talk about. If there's one monopoly capital in this country, it's state monopoly capital, and they're trying to enforce that now and entrench that, and even with the post office. But I think maybe just to link to what Chris has said already, people are just not going to fall for this. People are going to make other plans. People are not going to start using the post office now all of a sudden. Maybe there might be a slight increase if this goes through. I doubt that it'll go through. But if it goes through, people are not going to use it. People are just going to use other means. They're going to use ways to bend the regulations or go around the regulations. That's just because it's so crazy in the first place. But secondly, you're not going to change the basic premises or the basic fundamentals on which human society is built by saying now everyone is forced to use the post office. And it's already, the estimates are already that it's going to slow down the speed at which mail is going to be delivered, and for obvious reasons.
Absolutely. And Hugo, let me come to you, because you're in France, and I do want to get a sense of to bring an international perspective to this by keeping it to the topic, which is again the dangers of assuming that a state entity can deliver, as I like to argue, pretty much anything. As a libertarian, I would argue that there's some things that the state can do, but really most things, if not the vast majority of things, should be in the hands of a competitive market, people who are incentivized to provide the best service possible because there is either a cash incentive or whatever the case may be. Let me draw an example here just to kick you off. The country that is one of your neighbors, Germany, the massive international conglomerate DHL, a lot of people don't know, began as part of the German version of the post office, but included, over time, privatized large elements of it in order to meet what was a changing world of demand for these sort of services. Isn't this the sort of thing that we should be doing here in South Africa?
Well, there's a bit of a trick to that. The first thing is, look, the argument for a post office has always been it's a natural monopoly. So it's like the railways or the highways. Therefore, it's the common good, and everyone must share it. Now, I don't think in the days of Uber Eats and people with bicycles delivering newspapers, anyone really believes that anymore. So you've got laws that are just outdated. The post office, as we know it today, my understanding, started in Italy at a time when it actually started as a private enterprise, and then the governments later on monopolized it and used it for political ends. There's a long history of the post office. But if you go and look at Germany, for example, she mentioned DHL, they privatized it. But now with privatization, there's also problems. And one of the problems with privatizations we saw in the Eastern European countries and the Russian companies, and that's like, who gets the shares after it's privatized, right? And aren't you just making a concentrated private wealth as opposed to saying you're letting the market run? So it's very good to say we're going to privatize, but it doesn't matter if we privatize, then we keep the laws in place that protects the monopoly in the first place. And that's kind of what happened in the Eastern European countries. So yeah, privatization for a post office, I mean, this debate has been going on since, I think I read the book of Milton Friedman in the 1970s, from the 1970s, where he already argued the US post office should be privatized. And by the way, these monopolies, the post office, protect the big companies. Amazon is running their services on cheap US subsidies. The reason you're getting cheap parcels because the US taxpayer is subsidizing Amazon's delivery. It will be, it's just the South African one is badly managed. The US one is government, it's semi-well managed, and there you can debate economic incentives and saying what is the best way for society to organize it. In South Africa, I didn't even know we had a post office still. I've never used it since I've been over here.
I think most people find out we have a post office when they actually protest and strike.
No, when I got to France, I had to phone my mother to ask her, how do I put a stamp on a postage? Because I really didn't know which side it goes. I've never used it in South Africa.
Hey man, you're making me feel old up in here. Nzuzo, let me come to you, because again, I think the chaps have set up the arguments quite lucidly here. But again, there is a conversation to be had, and I know what would happen, right? I know what would happen. Some lefty listening to us will go, oh, there they go again. Those right-wingers. In fact, as I say that, a reminder to my viewers that every week here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show, I do the scary right-winger roar. That's right. Big Daddy Liberty, of course, is accused of being a, quote, scary right-wingers. Here we go. Nzuzo, just give me a moment here. Nzuzo, give me a moment. And a reminder to you, dear viewer, it's really scary. Put the kids away. Here we go. Roar! I'm sorry. I had to keep that troll happy. But Nzuzo, let me come back to you. Some left winger would listen to us and say, "Oh, there they go again. The scary right wingers talking about privatizing this and privatizing that." But really, if we didn't have the post office, the person who lives in Offenbaba or rural KZN would never get their post, would they, Nzuzo? Or as if those people are not part of a technological world that is keeping pace with things. But those people would never get their post.
I'll retort back and say that I'd rather wait, only 2 weeks than to wait 8 months for any type of a letter or postcard or anything, because that's the type of service that you get from the post office. At the end of the day, people who live in rural areas are not, they're not backwards people. They're not different to the people that live in the cities. They also deserve efficient and quicker services, like we're all getting. So if the post office also has competition such as Postnet, Uber Eats, and all these other companies, why don't you actually expand those companies to rural places? Because let's say, for example, some of these people also need the post office, from what I know, also provides social grants, for these people who live in rural areas, and they pay out social grants. And we've seen the issues that come about because of social grants not having, well, because of the bureaucracy that comes with the South African Post Office and the Department of Social Development being inefficient, slow in paying out social grants. And I think that if we are to expand, allow some of these companies to also provide those services, it'll be much more easier for these people to get these grants and these letters and these postcards. I'm obviously not saying that, the post office is some type of demon or devil that does not deserve to play a role, but it cannot use its monopoly by way of the state to implement to keep its competitors out. It also needs to compete. And also, funny thing is that when I read that provision in the act, whoever wrote it, I don't understand as to why they kept it at 1 kilograms. Like, and don't you also want to like deliver other things as well? Don't you want to also deliver, for example, laptops? It could be, things over 1 kilogram. I don't understand as to why you only kept it at 1 kilogram. It's like the arguments about minimum wage.
2 kilograms is heavy.
Yeah, it's the same argument about the minimum wage. It's like, why is it only 3,500? Why there's not 40,000? It's like, what is the basis behind these numbers? And you'll find that they don't have any basis. They just pick 1 kilogram and they went with it. And that's what you see.
You're exposing a good point when it comes to the states. It's just arbitrary. When you feel as though you have the power, the right to exercise exclusive power over things, and of course your decision making is arbitrary. It's not linked to what the market says, demands, trends in the market. You say, well, a kilogram is enough. Well, a kilogram it'll be. But you're absolutely right, guys. I'm going to move us on. We're heading to the 20-minute mark. If you've just joined us, dear viewer, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. I'm in conversation with Ernst from Afriforum, Chris Hattingh from the Free Market Foundation, Hugo Kruger, who of course is an independent analyst, a voice on the show. There'll be some interesting stuff I do with Hugo in the near future. And of course, Nzuzo Khathi, co-host of the Manpatria show. Fellas, I'm going to move on to another corrupt monopoly, one Eskom, which has been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, but right now is facing another little storm that is developing by way of these power ships that it has commissioned via the state through a tender to have arrive in this country, moor in our ports, and provide up to about 1,500 megawatts of electricity using gas. The problem being that the bidder who's won this particular tender is a Turkish company, which I can't find the name of right now, Car Power Ship. Quite a sweet deal being given to them, a 20-year deal by the sounds of things, to produce this electricity. But Eskom itself is raising the alarm bell, saying, hey, we might not actually be able to afford this power, and it might not be the most efficient thing for us. Let me begin with you, Hugo.
Let me. So I work in the energy sector, so I've got some background on this one.
Your thoughts on these? 2 questions to you.
Well, first of all, this is a stupid deal. Let's just get that out of the way. These ships are designed for 5 years, and now the government is doing it for 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you're basically buying a ship which is not purposed for 20 years. If you say it's a 20-year emergency, because those ships are for emergency powers. Now, 20 years is not an emergency. That's a life cycle analysis of a project. So first of all, it's just incompetence from the government. Second one is there's a 50% BEE deal, and surprise, the tariffs are twice as high as they should be. Wonder why that's the case, you know? But then even more importantly, these Turkish ships, and I'm going to read you now, the financial prosecutor of Lebanon this week sent it, and it was published all over the, because I work in the LNG sector actually, and it says public financial prosecutor Ali Ibrahim ordered that the Turkish electric generating barrages be prevented from leaving Lebanon's shores. The finance and energy minister and the security forces were informed by the court of etc. corruption in Lebanon. So this exact same company, Car Power, was involved in a corrupt deal in Lebanon. Maybe the government should have checked it out. They were being prosecuted in Lebanon at the time before the deal was signed in South Africa. So, you know, this is just, it's a combination between corruption, incompetence, and just not knowing what you're doing.
Absolutely. And the frustrating thing that I think the average South African would have heard when they started listening to this is, there it goes again. There it goes again. If you look at any deal that is commissioned by the states, of course, we've now come to understand that corruption is part and parcel of it, and often it is the use of race-based empowerment deals to facilitate not the empowerment of Black people, as we're told, but actually the empowerment of a political elite. Now, Ernst, I'm looking to you on this one because we will have a conversation in a few minutes on BEE in and of itself, but I want to come to you on this particular point because, again, this particular nuance, the idea that the state and really politicians often use BEE as a fig leaf for their corruption. People are waking up to this, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. No, people are definitely waking up to this. I think Hugo said this is a case of incompetence and corruption, and maybe there's a third element to this, which is just the fact that they are completely power hungry and refusing to give up on this power. And that's probably, I was thinking about the comment about why did the post office, why did they cap it at 1 kilogram, and why is minimum wage capped at 3,500 and all of this. I think there's an underlying thing here that they probably know it's a bad idea. The idea about minimum wage or the idea about having this monopoly on parcels is a bad idea, but they still want to do it. So they say, no, we're only going to do it to this point. I'm speculating, of course, but this whole thing with Eskom, it just shows, and the post office is this. It's the same. It's just a different strand of the same phenomenon, as you said. It just shows to what extent these government industries are prepared to go to hold on to power when there are obvious better solutions to the problem that they're trying to deal with. If the problem is in terms of the post office is making sure people get mail easier or quicker, there's an obvious solution to that, which is the opposite to monopolizing power with the post office. And if the problem is electricity in South Africa, then there's an obvious solution to that as well, which again is the opposite to this whole scheme that they are busy with. So the solution I think Reagan who said that the government solution to Milton Friedman who said the government solution to a problem is usually worse than the problem itself, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing it with the post office thing and with Eskom. And just on your comment, just quickly, I know we're going to get to that, but on BEE. I think that's the lesson I learned this week is that there are very, very few people left in this country who still maintain that BEE is a good policy. The problem is once we all agree that BEE is a bad policy, we should now discuss, okay, well, what's a better policy? And my experience from this Black Management Forum event I went to is that from the likes of Zwanele Manyi and so forth, they think if we want a better policy is one that is built on more government regulation, more government monopoly. If we can only achieve this, the reason why this policy has failed and the reason why Eskom and all of these are failing is because we have been cheated. We've been cheated by government who's not aggressive enough, or we've been cheated by these white companies who are all with all this systemic racism, and they are just and the solution to the likes of, let's call it the left, is an obvious one to their mind. It's just more government regulation. We need to add, well, if we look at this act, there's not really enough regulations to deal with section 16C3. So maybe we need more regulations on that section, and then that will need to tie to this different act. And it becomes this endless, very complicated discussion about government policies. And we're seeing that with the post office thing now as well. And eventually we sit there for hours debating very nuanced, very detailed things about government policies when the solution, or at least the metaphor I used at this event was, it's like when your house isn't really what you want it to be, and then you build a different room here, and then you need something else, and you build something on the other side, and eventually someone walks into the house and says, this house doesn't make sense, it's very poorly constructed, and the reason why is, well, the solution to that is demolish the house and build a new one, or build the house somewhere else. Don't build it on sand, build it on rock, or if you want to use that metaphor. But I think that's the issue here. Is I think there seems to be agreement that the BEE policy at least has failed. There's not really. I don't know if there's agreement yet that Eskom has failed. I don't know if I think there's still a lot who would like us to believe now it's only this temporary hiccup. That's at least what the president is trying to convince us that this is just a temporary thing. They're sorting out the afdakkie to make sure that the coal doesn't get wet, and then we're going to be fine. And obviously that's not the case.
You know, there's a comment that I'm just watching here by Rudolph, and I think he's spot on. And I'll come to you with it, Chris. You know, this weird belief that is held onto by some people, mostly on the left, this idea that, you know, it's just a question of more government that actually is required, you know, or my favorite argument from them, you know, you just need to get the right people in, and, you know, with the right people in, and if they can exercise this monopoly or exclusive power, then things will be fine. And then he cites examples like Gusile and Medupi, these two power plants, coal-burning power plants, each meant to produce about 4,000 megawatts. They were meant to be ready, you know, years ago. They're years in delay now. The same people who mismanaged that, and it continues, they'll continue to mismanage that, are the same people who are expecting to be in control of a deal that sees these power ships going. The definition of madness, Chris, comes to mind, or insanity comes to mind when I listen to people who insist on Eskom maintaining a monopoly.
Well, this goes back to President Ramaphosa's appearance at the Zondo Commission 2 weeks ago, when he said it was mainly due to lapses and unfortunate hindrances that the ANC didn't take account for corruption and state capture for the last few years. So as you rightly say, it's simply a matter of getting the quote-unquote right people in charge of the levers of power. You see, the problem is when you mix the economy and politics, you inevitably mess with the market incentives and market forces. And in a country like South Africa, where economic freedom is continually declining, whenever people say we have capitalism, I always find that interesting, because I can't find it anywhere. When you have declining economic freedom, the wealth pie, as it were, continues to shrink. That raises the stakes for political competition and political violence. That's why you see increased violence in KZN, for example. It becomes a case of my group and my guy has to win, because that's the only way I can get ahead. I can't get ahead by creating a business, employing people, innovating, growing, providing services. The only way I can get ahead is by the political connections that I have. So, and that's when we see these corrupt deals, for example, with the Turkish company and Eskom. That's when we see the state trying to enforce a monopoly in terms of the post office. It's all opportunities for those who are well connected to maintain their line of wealth that they can give to themselves and their families. And you always see them trying to maintain that monopoly. I think, as Hugo also pointed out, in the US, for example, when you have subsidies provided to big companies to keep out competition, that's when, again, you see the market not really acting as it normally would. And this isn't to say that a free market is some sort of utopia where, quote unquote, you get 100% employment or everyone is equally wealthy or that kind of thing. But in that regard, no one is using force against each other, which is very much the case now, where the state simply uses force to keep out those who it doesn't, quote unquote, approve of.
Absolutely. And let me come to you, Nzuzo, because there's something I want to broach with you, a particular point I want to broach with you, because I think it's often directed at people like you and I. We'll hear this argument being said, well, you know, they'll say, they'll say, BEE is absolutely fantastic. We should not be blaming BEE for the problems we're seeing in state-owned entities. In fact, It is the black population in this country, including you and I, Nzuzo, who are the beneficiaries of BEE, will be told. In fact, that poor chap who lives in a shack in a sand dune, the example that I always use on the show, is a beneficiary, poor as he is a beneficiary of BEE, as is currently being enjoyed by the political elites, because at least it's black people who are getting the money and not those annoying whites they'll tell us, or the white monopoly capital. So by implication, their argument is people like you and I, who are not BEE beneficiaries, are at least living vicariously through those people who do get the BEE deals. Your response to that, Nzuzo, because I can tell you now, even as I make this argument, I can feel myself getting a bit hot under the collar.
Yeah, I always tell those people just to keep quiet and shut up, like, you know.
Man.
And I use the example of the education system, you know, in the country, particularly public schools and particularly schools in the rural and townships, where you have these teachers that are only appointed based on their BEE and also their alignment with trade unions. And I tell them, and we look at the mess that is the education system itself. You know, the lack of success. Kids having 500,000 kids or more. Half of the kids that start grade 1 don't even finish it. These kids cannot do math. They cannot read and write. And ultimately, there's no type of disciplinary measures that are put into place for teachers and principals who do not provide the outcomes that we require so to develop this economy, you know. And it's all based on who and like BEE, like the outcomes of BEE is all based on who you're aligned with or who you connected with. If you COSATU and you are SATU, the teacher unions, and obviously you in bed with the ANC, you're always gonna get the favoritism. You're always gonna get what you want because you know, ANC is the party of the working class. Meanwhile, the working class is at the bottom, and the gap is growing larger. The inequality between the middle class blacks and the working class blacks is growing larger. You and I have the opportunity, and I'm grateful for that, for being able to still be in the middle class. But at the same time, I cannot be happy when I see, you know, people look like you and I who just have the unfortunate to be unlucky to have been born in poverty, and now they cannot actually get out because they've been given poor education, poor service delivery. I mean, when you go to the municipalities, God, like when you go to any municipality outside of Gauteng and you go into municipality like in Mpumalanga, it's just, you know, the officials are appointed just based on the fact that they're black. You know, it's not necessarily because that they're good, don't have necessarily the skills. And that's why you see when you go outside of, when you go to the rural municipalities, they don't have the certain departments that are required, such as town planners. There's a great need for town planners in rural communities, in rural municipalities, but they're never there because you're only picking the black town planners, and there are no black town planners. You're running out. You need as many town planners as possible so that you can actually develop these rural communities.
One of the things, and I want to come back to Ernst because I think we can smoothly transition to this particular issue of BEE and the meeting, Ernst, you were referring to with the Black Management Forum, BMF, for the sake of the viewers who are wondering what the acronym was earlier. You know, there is a growing consensus now amongst those who I argue who are the actual beneficiaries of BEE, which is that top crust, that creme de la creme, if you will, of the black, often political elites in this country, who, because of their, and I know they know this, I know they know as they drive their flashy German sedans, you know, watching the next black chap pulling a trolley as he puts recyclables in it, you know, someone who lives in the absolute poorest conditions in this country. I know they know that the policy that they often advocate for in the mainstream has been a complete and utter failure. And there's something you said to me just before we went on the stream. You said they themselves concede this, but I wanted to remake the arguments, these sort of mental gymnastics they then go through for why they argue that BEE has failed and what they want as either to double down or preferred policy. And I'll come to the rest of you guys now, because I think there is a conversation to be had in this country for the need for empowerment policy. There is definitely a conversation for that. But race perhaps is not the metric we should be using. But let me not count chickens yet. Adams, talk to me about the meeting and some of the conversations you had at that meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just a quick response to Nzuzo, to the question also you posed to Nzuzo. I would say that if the question is who are the real beneficiaries of BEE, and you've also pointed out now it's the politically connected, but I would say that a white businessman in Sandton who is friends with Tokyo Segwale or whoever is in the correct camp in the ANC at the moment is a much bigger beneficiary of ANC that as well, of BEE than the black person in Alexandria who lives across the street. So
delicious irony in that regard.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's in a way rich white people are benefiting more from BEE than poor black people. That's the irony about this thing. So what was interesting about this discussion is let's link it to Jimmy Manyi, or Zwanele Manyi as he prefers to be called. I heard earlier during a discussion, a previous discussion, I heard him talk about white privilege, and he said the thing about white privilege is white people are the people; they are the ones with all the connections, so they can achieve much more success because they have connections. But if you're black, you don't have those connections, and I bear that in mind when you consider what he said at this event. Because I don't think there's a lot of doubt that someone like Zwanele Manyi has a lot of political connections. He was DG of the Department of Labor, and he was, what's this other government? He was the chairperson of the Employment Equity Commission, and there was this other government commission, I can't even remember what it was, of which he was the chairperson. But so he said, no. So within the context of politically connected people benefiting from BEE, he said, no, he doesn't benefit from BEE. He concedes that he has connections, but it's because of the fact that he has connections that he's not benefiting from BEE. That's his line. And he said no, because people are so cautious to work with him because it might be perceived as that he's only getting this opportunity because of his connection, so he's not getting the opportunities. That's basically the line he was taking there. There was some maybe I can point to this. There was a discussion I had with one of the Black Management Forum members after the discussion concluded, and we all had some snacks and coffee and whatever, and just discussed the evening. And one of these BMF members came to me, and I made a comment there about Afrikaner history, and especially after the Anglo-Boer War and the rebellion of 1914, as it was known, when people started selling koeksisters to each other and collecting, kleingeld and putting it together to raise money to build universities and stuff like that. And I said, I think that's a lesson that we should learn. If we learn a lesson from Afrikaner history, the most important lesson is probably from around 1920. And then one of these BMF members came to me and he said, no, I'm wrong. The lesson we should be learning from Afrikaner history is more around 1950 to 1960. And I said to him, how so? What happened between 1950 and 1960? And he said to me and he's of course defending that we need more aggressive BEE. He said to me the best thing that Afrikaners did was they took control of the state, they took control of the levers of power, and they used these levers of power to benefit their own community, even if it was at the expense of others. And so I paused for a moment. I said to him, are you saying to me that the best thing that Afrikaners did was apartheid? And then he paused for a moment and he said, I think that's what I'm saying, yes. so it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy how detached some of these people are, at least from reality. But
at least he knows his history.
Yeah, it seems like it. But I think the silver lining at that event was we have two meetings lined up after that event. There was a lady from Kabelu from the Black Management Forum Youth who said she's tired of all this endless debating about government policies. She wants to be involved with projects. And she actually, during the discussion, I wasn't even aware of it. She said she's already spoken with Afriforum Youth. And so we have a meeting now lined up, and she wants us to take her to the Saltec campus so she can speak to people there. How did they manage to build this, and are there projects on which we can work together? And there was another lady there who's quoted in Rapport newspaper today as well, who's an author, who said, she stood up and she said, we cannot just carry on waiting for government to fix the problem. We have to build our own institutions. We need the way she framed it was, we need a black broederbond. But what she meant, at least, was that we need some form of we need institutions that are aimed at uplifting the community. And now we can argue if that's what the broederbond did, or at least whether the broederbond did it in the correct way. But there was this strong emphasis on building institutions and not waiting for government, not waiting for other people to solve our problems. And I think that at least was good news.
And I want to come in here. I'm gonna start with Chris and then come to you, Nzuzo. Chris, this last particular point, and if it really took this meeting for that penny to drop for a lot of people, then by goodness, let there be more of those particular meetings, but also more of the action that was described or wanted by this particular lady. There's something really funny for me, Chris. When I watch people who will bitch and moan and complain and gnash their teeth, when I have a conversation about the likes of Afriforum, when I have a conversation about the likes of Solidariteit, or some of these small organizations that I refer to sometimes under my broad heading of the Mazakele culture, and I'll get into that a bit later, but Mazakele being a Zulu word for do-it-yourself. A ethos I've argued on this show is that the true future of a country like South Africa is not the individual or really families or communities waiting for the state, but instead communities adopting the Mazakele culture, a band of individuals banding together, with an idea, with a goal, and marching through the institutions of society or creating institutions in their community in order to do things for themselves. I say something like this and I'm labeled a right-winger, an Uncle Tom, a coon, I don't understand black pain, blah, blah, blah. And I asked myself the question, what is it then that people really want? Now, long monologue and apologies for it, but I wanted to get my say out in this particular instance. But I want to come to you because I know you'll give me the libertarian slant here. The desperate need for South African communities to actually start adopting that Mazakele culture, as I refer to it. What are some practical things that people can honestly really do in their own communities to take power from the state and deliver things for themselves?
Just on the point of the barbs and the insults that are thrown around, Ernst van Zyl, Conscious Karakal on Twitter, he recently had a very good article on the Rational Standard that I'd like people to go and read as well, just about the sort of barbs and words thrown around and the meaninglessness of certain words nowadays. So for yourself, Sikle, and for others, find themselves broadly on the liberty spectrum of things. If you get thrown with insults, it says more about the people throwing them around, I think, than you yourself. On the point of practical solutions and practical ownership, I think Afriforum stands as probably one of the best success stories maybe in modern South Africa. What it can show you what happens when people engage voluntarily with each other, and when they work towards goals together, when they bring their different abilities, characteristics, skills, blessings, all those sorts of things to bear. It just shows you how much people can actually solve and what they can do together when they don't have the state trying to force them in quote unquote good ways to do what a bureaucrat thinks is best. I think it boils down to the folly of the central planner, and this is something that Hayek pointed out a lot, and that Deirdre McCloskey as well in The Myth of the Entrepreneurial State. She talks a lot about how statists and collectivists presume that the bureaucrat has perfect knowledge of society and that the bureaucrat can dictate how societies should function. And in a multicultural country like South Africa's, that is a recipe for disaster, for presuming that everyone thinks the same, should act the same, should have exactly the same goals, should live the same, all these sorts of things. So I think it boils down to people, their families, their communities deciding what challenges they face on a sort of very, to use the Afrikaans saying, plot op die aarde, basic framework. It's not just about lofty, grand government projects. It's about basic things like water infrastructure, that sort of thing. So for communities to figure out what's challenging them in their societies, and then thinking about how they can solve them, and not wanting to wait for the bureaucrat in Pretoria or Bloemfontein or Cape Town to come and quote unquote save them. It's a different mindset and mind shift. It's sort of top down versus grassroots or bottom up kind of thing, I think.
Absolutely. Hugo, let me come to you, because I would argue, and Ernst, I'll let you verify what I'm about to say, because your organization is instrumental in some of these cases that I'm about to cite. I would argue that it is small town South Africa, the likes of your Piet Retiefs or your Coligny's or your, I can go down the line naming small town South Africa. And those particular two cases now, I just realized why I named them. But anyway,
you're naming all the racist small towns.
But let me move on to make the point, and I want to put this to you. It is small town South Africa, Hugo, which already understands this impetus of the Mazakele culture, or do it yourself. There have been numerous cases, for example, on carte blanche and blah, 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 of residents who said, you know what, we're just fed up now. We're going to take control, and we're not going to ask for permission. We'll literally fix our own infrastructure, and it has not been for the benefit of a few. It's actually benefited the whole town, invariably. The very people, for argument's sake, who we're told are unrepentant racists, who hate blacks, or whatever the case may be, will take up an initiative with black residents in a particular town. There's a nice town in KZN that did this. I can't think of it right now.
Harry Smith, I think.
Sorry, say again?
It wasn't Harry Smith?
I think it was Harry Smith, where the residents of the town banded together, fixed their sewage and water infrastructure, and hey presto, there's water there. Is this not the ethos? We need to be traveling around the country, as I said on my little note here, promoting and actually building a culture of, to say politicians are trash, we can do better.
Well, I think this is happening worldwide. I've been tracking migration data in the United States, in France, and in South Africa, for that matter. Fastest growing cities in South Africa, for example, is Ballito. It's Knysna. Okay, it is some places, even the Vrystaat is having lots of migration. In the United States, the top migration areas is Florida, it is Texas. It's South Carolina at this stage. People are moving from the big cities. We've been sold, and this is where I've got a bit of a background in city planning. We've been sold in city planning this meme that everyone is going to move to mega cities worldwide. And the mega cities worldwide only make about 10% of all the urban landscape. It's just not true. So people move to suburbia, people move to small towns if they can afford to. Sometimes going to cities, you go there for opportunity, but if you can settle in a nice coastal area, people do so nowadays. And with the internet and decentralization, we are seeing this is going to be the future. Right, all trends to me point in the direction that it's actually unprecedented in human history that there's actually a resettlement of the countryside happening. The market is doing what Pol Pot wanted to do, and they're doing it successfully. So this is a reality, and I think it's just going to happen slowly but surely. I don't think we should even push it. We should probably promote it where we can, but I think what's going to happen is that slowly but surely it's ripping the carpet underneath the government. And while they're bickering and complaining and buying useless ships, etc., these things will just spawn up, and you'll have some kind of spontaneous order. You're seeing it in France as well, by the way. Paris is depopulating. During lockdown, Paris lost 20% of its population, 20% of a mega city. Okay, and this was in Berlin, all these places. They're moving to Aix-en-Provence, they're moving to Bordeaux, they're moving to all these places in the countryside. And it seems to me that all indication is that not all those people will come back to Paris. So you're already seeing coastal cities in America, property prices going down. It's unprecedented. So, I just tell the government, I feel at this stage where I don't really care what the government does. I think it's a waste of space, it's a waste of energy. It's mentally not doing me anything. I'm sitting in France, I'm connecting to people in South Africa. And, if I can have my salary in Bitcoin very soon, I will do so, but it's still not entirely feasible. But I think the world is moving to this space, and in a sense, the government is making itself irrelevant.
Absolutely. Let me come to you, Nzuzo, and Ernst, I'll end this segment with you because, again, we began it by discussing BEE, but I think people who are listening can now see how a policy like BEE becomes an impediment to an ethos like this one of Mazakele, because we're asking people to obsess about race and dispersing opportunity in society through the prism of race, when in reality we should be talking to people as individuals and really families and communities, doing things on the basis of being families and communities. Race is irrelevant, your gender is irrelevant, it's what you as individuals, as families in a community can do for each other. But let me come to you, Nzuzo, because I think there's an interesting point here to be made around, and I'm going to throw a little bit of a spanner for you because I know you're in the legal fraternity, much like Adam, excuse me. I think there's a conversation to be had around people taking ownership of, correction, let me take 2 steps back. I think there's a conversation to be had around how the legal and judiciary can empower citizens to actually take charge of their own spaces. I flagged this particular comment by Henry Menkes regarding Koster in the Northwest, because I think this is the particular town where the residents actually took the municipality and the municipal, manager to court and said, listen, if you don't deliver XYZ, I think it was water, then we'll hold you, dear municipal manager, in contempt of court. You face prison time. Whilst in the meantime, we fix our own infrastructure. Is there a need to align legislation to an ethos like this of communities taking charge and doing things for themselves?
Yeah, of course, but you're also going to have to then change the constitution itself, which necessarily gives powers to municipality to take to deal with water and electricity infrastructure in its own jurisdiction. Obviously, you'll need political parties for that to happen. But in terms of the judiciary, remember also the judiciary is also made up of people who believe in this type of ideology, if I may say. They believe in it, and it will be difficult to find people who see the need in communities taking up the mantle and providing for themselves. But and also the issue is that the judiciary is, most of the jurists are slaves to the legislation, so they only make decisions according to what the legislation says. But it's not to say that the judiciary cannot take decisions outside of that and see the common sense in allowing communities who are able to, like Costa, are able to actually provide their own services to do that, and see the utter failure of municipalities such as Costa local municipalities in providing their own providing electricity as well as water infrastructure to their community. So I think that it needs a more nuanced and also a more practical approach, because also the issues that come about is that once you give the communities powers to take over their own municipalities, who takes on the liability if something goes wrong? Is it the municipality or the communities? It's a huge legal debate, and I've already heard it in legal circles in and around, particularly Pretoria as well as Johannesburg. Advocates saying that this is particularly a bad decision, and they don't think that municipalities should, courts or the judiciary should allow communities to just take up water infrastructure, because then who's liable if something goes wrong? I think that at the end of the day, it's an argument that is short-sighted. I think that we need to look at the longer term. I think that communities must be able to be involved in the provision of their own water, the provision of electricity, and you can't just stick to the law. The law can only go so far. Communities understand their own environment, circumstances, and they're able to implement the very things that they need in their own communities. And the law cannot speak to that. Some of these laws only speak to communities that are in Johannesburg, Sandton, the Cape Towns. They don't speak to the Costas. They don't speak to the Tsanins. They don't speak to the Emalahlenis. It's two different worlds. But I think going forward, we can start having those debates and have those discussions, because it needs to happen. I think that the legislation nowadays is too rigid. It does not allow too much. It does not allow nuance in it. It does not allow communities to set their own tone, and I think we need to change that. But just piggybacking on what Ernst said about talking about the fact that they all at the BMF, they all conceded that BEE is a failure, but yet they still want more government regulation. I think it's a case of fear, and I see that a lot also in the youth, in the Black youth who I obviously hang around with, and it's a case of, it's not only BEE, but it's just them expecting that government is going to come in and save them. That's why you see scores of youth in the townships just sitting on the corner streets. They think to themselves that someone's going to save them, and you taking away government or government assistance is something that they've never thought about. They always think to themselves that government is going to be there to give them the jobs, give them the money, give them the social grants, whatever it may be for them to actually survive. But for them to take on the mantle and do it themselves, it's going to take a lot. I think it can be done, but it's going to take a lot. And I think it's going to take people like you and I, Sihle, to really implement that type of mindset into these kids and into the youth, because they're the ones that are the future. They're the ones that need to obviously take on these communities and take them further than what, the Gwede Mantashes and all these old timers have done or even have not done. But yeah.
And as much as I must agree with them, I want to come to you, Ernst, just now in a moment. I want to make a point that just as I throw it to you, that you're spot on. And that's why I'm looking to starting let me call it a campaign, for lack of a better word, structured around this notion of the Mazakele culture, because you want to reach that Alti who's sitting on the street corner, waiting for Godot at times, waiting for opportunity to sort of rain down from the state, but who and I must say this, who himself is not lazy though. Himself and his own motivations, he wants to be able to be industrious, enterprising, to do things. But again, he's not within the realm of opportunity, because opportunity in this country, that is, yes, I'm right, opportunity in this country has been sort of put through this narrow lens of either a race, and really, even if as you talk about race, preferably towards those who have the closest proximity to political power. So yes, there are Black people who benefit from empowerment policies and opportunities, but it is often those Black people who have the closest relationship to politicians who benefit at the expense of that Black chap, the outie, sitting on the side of the corner. And I can tell you why I'm passionate about this one, and you raised it in a term that spoke to me. I used to be that guy who stood at the street corner with my friends. There's about 10 of us. We called ourselves the Outlaws. Mlazi, in my township where I'm from. And yes, we were outlaws in every sense of that expression. I'm not proud of it. Not me per se. I was Mr. Law and Order and Mr. Morals in the group. But, these are chaps who I grew up with. We went through puberty together. We became boys to men together. And I could see the difference between, say, someone like me, who comes from a stable family background, pushed into being able to pursue what I want through a good education and the like, and a chap who is just as much the same as me, but maybe comes from a poorer family background. That for him became a massive impediment. There was no one in his family telling him, chap, wake up, go to school, hear your books. There was no discipline instilled, for example, which I had, for example, with a committed parent, or be it a single parent. But the point I'm trying to bring in here, Ernst, as I swing to you, is that there are so many factors that actually get in the way of the individual achieving and being able to achieve. Sorry, I get trapped by my own sentence construction here. Let me rephrase. There are so many things that actually do get in the way, sociologically speaking, of the individual being able to pursue their own opportunities, to pursue their happiness. And often it's not race. It is other factors such as your family background. Is there a father in the household, for example? Is your community safe? Are there institutions of education, healthcare, safety and security that create an enabling environment? All of these things we're losing in terms of the debate in this country because we're so obsessed, as the elites would have us believe, on race and gender, and all these things that really are part of that social justice ideology, which I spoke about with my guest on Wednesday, James Lindsay. Talk to me about the need for us to focus on these other social issues that really have a greater impact on the individual.
Yeah, well, I think that's very important. I just want to link one thing to the comment you made about the advocate you spoke to, and then I'll answer your question. You can make a flawless argument about why communities should not take control of their infrastructure, and it could be, legally speaking, a very good argument, and theoretically speaking, a very good argument, but that doesn't change the fact that the municipalities are not delivering these basic services. And that's the problem when you have this very strict idea about a legal order and you're trying to enforce that on reality, and you cannot adapt to reality because then you would have to change your legal arguments. So you have to change reality to suit your you have to pretend that reality is something else than it is. I think the point you made about achieving is very important, and there are. Look, I think there are. If we want to talk about it in terms of race, there are certain things I think that, and if we talk about, we spoke about BEE. So if we talk about Black people and the problems that Black people are experiencing in South Africa, I think white people should be able to concede that a lot of these problems are in some way could be linked to something that white people have done. But I think Black people should also be able to concede that a lot of these problems have nothing to do with white people. And it's the other way around as well. It's the same with if we talk about problems that white people are experiencing, and I don't like to break it down in terms of race, but we're linking to this whole discussion about Black empowerment now. For example, community plays a very important role in this whole thing. And I know there was some. It's not a secret that South Africa has one of the worst education systems in the world. And interestingly enough, or sadly enough, doesn't seem to me, at least from the discussion I attended at the Black Management Forum, that the elites who were there care anything about the failure of the education system. I mentioned it, I think, twice, and no one linked onto that. Yeah, it's just not important to fix the education system. We need to talk about government policies all the time.
Because where do their children go to school, Ernst? They don't go to township schools, they go to the private schools.
I think you're absolutely right. And there's been some studies, including by Statistics South Africa, about why schools are failing in South Africa. And Stats SA, I don't know how they broke it down, but they had a study about white schools and Black schools. And they said 80% of the schools are dysfunctional, and it's mostly the Black schools. And a lot of the problems that are experienced in these schools have to do with things like teacher absenteeism and things like that. So there are other issues as well that we need to look at. But if we only look at it in terms of race, and we only look at it in terms of government policy being the solution, we're never going to get to the actual problems. And there are many problems in this country that can be linked to race. But there are many problems in this country that have nothing to do with race. And if we try to force a racial explanation onto those problems, we're not going to achieve anything. I just want to link also to the point about Koster, because the viewers might be interested to know that on Tuesday, actually, there's 3 court cases about Koster, which they've added now. It's sort of one big court case. The one is actually a criminal case where Khathi now is involved to have the municipal manager there held criminally liable. Say that again?
It's to be held criminally liable for 9 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
What about Riedersburg?
Say that again. The what?
What about?
There's Riedersburg. There's another place in the Free State as well called Riedersburg that completely privatized the whole town.
Oh, yeah. And there are other examples like that as well. There was a case in the Eastern Cape. I can't remember which town it was. I remember Ernst Pringle was involved from Agri SA. So what they did, and we need more cases like this if we talk about legal strategy, is because you need to have a good case to build a legal precedent. So what they did, there was an agricultural community where the road to the community was so poor, and it was supposed to be maintained by government, that they were just doing nothing. And they had various efforts to try to get government to fix the roads. And eventually they got their own equipment, and they at their own expense, they fixed the roads themselves, because they weren't even able to travel on those roads. And they then went to court to force the municipality to pay them back, and they won. So effective, and I think we need more such cases. And this case about Koster now, what happened now is the local community basically took control of these services, and the municipality is fighting to get control back, but they're not able to deliver these services. And that's what's going to be debated in court on Tuesday. And that's, I think, and it's something it's the future in South Africa, but it's probably around the world, and Hugo would be able to talk about this, I think, with more experience. But something that we're probably going to see more of. And I really like the comment that Hugo made about just practically we can debate about to what extent it's possible, but at least the notion that we should stop caring about what government is doing and what government is trying to enforce, and just think about what can we do. And government is becoming more and more irrelevant, and that's good news.
So I want to add something else, another dimension to this, which is you ask yourself, when did the British Empire fall? Okay, and it fell primarily when radio became more popular than the press. The apartheid regime came down when TV became more popular than radio. TV was actually banned by the apartheid regime for this reason. Now, I just ask myself, does anyone seriously think that the ANC is going to survive social media if they have already? What we're doing here, connecting, managing, where is the little red button that PW Botha had phoning the SABC saying, Ernst, I don't like what you're saying at the moment, So they cannot really stop the narrative from spreading. And I am a big fan of Marshall McLuhan, who was a media theorist in communication, who made the point that the primary driver of history is communication. Whenever communication has changed, society has fundamentally changed. And I would like to have this conversation in 10 years' time and to see if we still even have an ANC or constitution. I'd be surprised if we still do. I mean, I really don't think the governments appreciate what is happening. And, it comes back to what is the definition of a state? And it goes to Max Weber, who said it's the monopolization of violence. Well, if we have more private security in the country than police, the state cannot enforce its law. It doesn't have a monopoly on violence anymore, right?
Unless
So
it
what's
brings the
happening in
army.
these... Yeah, it's private security is bigger than the army, but you're seeing small towns throwing their own mayors out, and there's no money and no police to enforce. If it was a real strong state, those guys in Costa who rebelled, the peasant rebellion, if you will, would have been thrown into jail by now. They're not. So we've exposed the weakness of the state.
And I was about to say, this is the guys, this conversation. This is the ethos, I would argue, that we actually should be taking to communities across the country. This, for me, is the crux of something like uMazakele, or that notion of uMazakele, is to show other communities that, hey, you don't have to fear that asshole who sits in the local, councillor's office and his minions, but those party political minions, that actually the power is in your hands, damn it. You can do something about your situation, and you can do it on the basis of being a community. Not blacks, not whites, a community, families who live in your own area. This is possible, chaps. And this is something I'm going to be investigating. Shout out to you, Ernst, with Afriforum and really Solidarity. You guys will be someone who I talk to about this particular campaign, because there's good reason to show people the examples in other parts of the world and to say you actually can also do this. Guys, I must keep an eye on time. It's 8 minutes past 9. We're in the last 20 minutes of Liberty and Friends. I'm going to have to move us on to another topic. Goodness me. We're cooking with grease now, as I often say. Guys, there's about 430 of us all in all across all the streams. Please, guys, get those likes up. I want to see those likes at least reaching 200. Please just hit the like button right now as you hear me say this. I must move us on, guys. The other issue that dominated the news week, and I hate the fact that we're going into it, but fudge it, let's have the brief conversation, is the shenanigans in the ANC. Now, as I always say on the show, don't be distracted, don't be dribbled. Hashtag don't be dribbled. Someone who's watching what happened this week might go, yay, ANC, finally, it's cleaning house, it's suspending those who are implicated with corruption, leading from the last elective conference, of course, where the ANC membership said those who are facing charges, actual criminal charges, should step aside. If they don't, should be suspended. Now, the big play we saw this week is I suspend you, no, I suspend you, between Cyril Ramaphosa and Ace Magashule. And again, I don't want to focus on that per se. I want to focus on the optics of this, because there's two schools of thought. The one that says, finally, the ANC is cleaning house. The other, which I happen to be on, that argues that actually, no, this is more dribbling of the public, and that really, there are no consequences really behind what is happening here. It's basically different factions playing each other out. Let me begin with you, Chris, because you've been a little bit quiet. But from when you first heard of these news, what were your initial thoughts? And then I'll come to you, Nzuzo, and then Ernst.
Well, ideologically, everyone who's involved in the ANC is driven by the National Democratic Revolution, which is deeply statist and collectivist. So regardless of who's implementing it, all of them presume that the state should be in control of our lives and they should be administering different programs. As far as I am aware, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, please do, but President Ramaphosa has at every opportunity been in favor of the national health insurance, in favor of expropriation without compensation. He's touched on that the SOEs, including SAA, should be kept alive. We need a national airline, quote unquote. ideas like that. So now that Ace Magashule is apparently out of the way, does that mean if we get EWC, we should then be upset with President Ramaphosa? Can his defenders still then stand up and say he has the best interests of the country at heart? I find it very interesting to see how people do mental gymnastics and try and twist themselves in different directions. Look, the one thing that I'm grateful for in terms of the ANC is that there's nothing that scares me more than an efficient communist. So the ANC's inefficient communism has in some ways kept South Africa, I think, to some extent still okay and on some sort of good path.
Can I just say
inefficient bureaucrats and communists in charge, then we're really going to be in trouble. So I don't think people should think that this is going to fundamentally result in 5% economic growth for the next 5 years, nothing like that. There's no serious structural reform. There's no serious radical economic transformation, not of the good sense anyway. We're not going to see actual free market reforms coming into place. And look, we've got local elections this year. So as you say, it's about optics. The ANC needs to be seen to be doing something. And they can say to people, look, we're trying to bring the rogue elements into line. But fundamentally, the ANC is still all about controlling South Africans' lives.
Hugo, let me come to you because you just said you wanted to interject.
So first, I just want to say the National Democratic Revolution, it's neither national democratic or revolutionary. It's the strangest three words, put together. It's really a horrible paper if you read it. Getting halfway through it, you fall asleep. But there's nothing extraordinary about it. And it's very uncreative. It's the standard old BS that the ANC's been pushing for the last 20 plus years, and it never works, And as Chris said, they're not very good communists because they're not very good at executing anything. They cannot get a power shift properly going. So, I ask myself always, should I be worried about these things? And obviously expropriation without compensation, etc., etc. But then I go and I look at the ANC's execution track record and I say, I wonder how many of these things are just going to explode into their face and it's just going to put us further into debt and, blow another hole into the national budget, etc., etc. So I'm kind of not worried about it. I see the red flag around it, obviously. But I think to myself, the ANC is losing the narrative of controlling the country. The Black Business Forum is turning on them. Obviously, by the fact that you're here today, Sikli tells me most Black people don't believe a single word the ANC tells them anymore. We know a great part of the media makes their ads from state revenue, state companies advertising them. So they just preach and are selling us dogma. So to me, it's a matter of time before the whole narrative collapses upon itself. Cyril Ramaphosa now went to Davos and he's claiming we're going to cut our carbon emissions. Okay, in a country where 80% of our electricity comes from coal. What are you talking about, right? Are you going to tell South Africans not to eat meat? Do you want to start a civil war? I mean, this is insanity.
Hey man, Greta Thunberg is going to come up in here and lecture us about eating.
Yeah, I want to see Greta Thunberg at a braai with a bunch of Afrikaners or Zulus and telling them, listen, they have to. She has to come and tell the South African tribesmen, okay, or the Black African tribes who pride their cattle more than gold. Okay, more than Europeans pride gold, that they need to kill them because their methane is killing the planet. Okay, that is what Ramaphosa is. Ramaphosa is signing onto that stupid deal, right?
How dare you?
So you just think that the policies, it's one crazy policy after another. It is insanity from the indoor to the outdoor. And, usually when a movement is at its end, it tends to get crazier and they tend to stab each other in the back. And we can clearly see this happening in the ANC. So all I'm saying is give them enough rope. They're going to hang themselves. And for the rest of us, get on with our lives. What I tell people is spend 5% of your time worrying about the ANC and spend 95% of your time trying to build the country and doing something more constructive, because they're really not worth the brainwaves anymore.
And let me come to you, Nzuzo, because there is a conversation to be had around this particular point. There's a desperation you can sense from the ANC for them to be seen as, guys, we're doing something about corruption, blah, blah, blah. But like Shakespeare, in all of Shakespeare's work, one of the common themes is the notion of appearances versus reality. The average South African looks at the ANC as it controls certain levels of state institutions, like the police, for example. And it says, but these guys, kudos to the cops who still try their best to enforce the law. But in reality, let me make a nice example here. You listen to the ANC talk about, fighting corruption, getting crime down and blah, blah, blah. But someone who is an ordinary chap, maybe holding his copy of La Duma, a soccer magazine, is thinking about, well, hang on, What about the murder of Senzo Meyiwa, for example? If you want to talk to us about getting crime right, it's in little moments like these where we want to see good examples of that. It's in little moments like these where you just don't talk about suspending ACE or any of the other corrupt individuals, but we actually see criminal prosecutions of these guys. Should we be taking an ANC that prostrates itself like this, looking for votes, seriously?
No, definitely not. ANC must die. I've been on record on saying that the ANC must just die, and we'll live happily and ever after. You know, after they die. I'm gonna also disagree with you guys a bit in that I don't think the average South African really does not care about the ANC, but they await something that they can hold on to in terms of what the ANC can give them. And I take the example of people who rely on social grants from the ANC. Those are a lot of people. You might believe that it's not necessarily sustainable to be giving so many people social grants, but these people depend on it, and in essence, they depend on the ANC. So, and also we have to take into account that the media and the people who are aligned with what the media thinks, the social justice warrior, they still believe that the ANC is going to change. They still believe that the ANC is going to reform. I mean, we've been hearing, we've seen across all media channels talk about how ACE was kicked out of the NEC, how ACE was suspended. They really give a lot of credence to whatever the ANC does. And I think they really believe in what the ANC is trying to do, which is to reform. But really, it's just a case of them just trying to clean up the image for the purposes of the elections. Of course, us on the panel and the people watching us know that the ANC is dead. The ANC is not going to do anything. And like you said, their policies are just, it's a mess. You hear one minister saying one thing, and then you hear another minister saying the total opposite. You'll hear Ace speaking like he's intellectual, and then after that you'll hear Zuma saying something completely different. So it's obviously it's a mess there. But the thing is that I think that a lot of people still believe, particularly the youth, still believe that the ANC, not the youth, but the people that depend on the ANC through social grants, believe that the ANC or the ANC still plays a part to them. And I think that they still give credence to what the ANC does. And I think that we need to obviously, when we talk about the Mazakele thing, those are the people we need to really speak to in terms of trying to let them understand that you continuously believing in the social grant, believing that the ANC is going to reform, is killing you and everyone else around you. We need to obviously move on from the ANC. And I think that, it's a case of us just pointing out the chaos, the mess that is the ANC, and then showing them that, there are policies and there are people, and also yourself can actually do better than what the ANC is offering.
Absolutely.
You. Yeah.
And I think that last point, I'm going to throw it to you, Ernst, but because we must move on. We're in the last 10 minutes of the show. But I think there's an important point to be made here, where, for example, in citing something like social grants and the over 12 million South Africans now who are dependent on them, at the end of the day, a social grant is also just an idea. And it's one which you can counter in a community by saying, yes, you are physically dependent on this 1,000 Rand right now, but merely changing those who are in the echelons of government can also come with a different set of ideas that still empower you, and maybe even more so. For example, an education voucher could be something we can talk about. Let me be precise and specific because I want to bring it in quickly, just for the conversation's sake. The private education provision company, Kruger, opened up a school in Delft, which is a poor Cape Town township, a poor Cape Town community on the Cape Flats. Now, you would think to yourself, whoa, why would a private education company, based on the rhetoric we often hear, you would think, why would a private company open a private school in a poor community? But the subscriber rate to that school, the moment it was operational, went through the roof. People were signing up to get their kids into this school. Let me come to you, Ernst, then I'll come to you, Chris. There is a recognition now, even by poorer people, that actually there can be a different way of organizing society. And that, yes, in the notion of empowerment, the state can play some role. For example, you can give poor people an education voucher to the value of 20,000 Rand, which is what the state is currently spending per pupil, for the parents, the individual, for them to decide where they shop around and get an education for their kids. And companies like Kuro will obviously build the infrastructure to meet a demand like that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, let's firstly, I think in terms of the social grants, the problem with that is it creates not only does it create government dependency, but it also creates an expectation. And we are approaching this fiscal cliff where last time I checked, if you add up government expenditure on social grants plus salaries for government officials, plus just servicing debt, it's already about 70% of government's expenditure or budget. So and it's increasing. So at some stage we're going to reach this cliff where the thing's going to crash, and obviously it's not going to be a good thing, which is why it's so important not to be government dependent and to try and break these policies that force people into government dependency. And the education thing is I mentioned it earlier. It's probably the most important thing to be fixed in this country. Even more important than fixing the government is fixing the education system and the problems that are with the education system. And a lot of the problems, the biggest problems of the education system, have to do with government and unions, ANC linked unions and so forth. So I think these are the real things. This issue, and this probably is a good bridge to the issue about Magashule and Ramaphosa, and how seriously should we take it. It's basically, if you saw Breaking Bad, it's basically like Walter White and Jesse Pinkman having an argument, and Walter White trying to fire Jesse Pinkman for being a criminal. There's not a clean side and a dirty side to the ANC, and I think a lot of people seem to think that if we can only get rid of the dirty people, then the clean people will finally, we will reach this thing that we've been waiting for since 1994 or since 1990 or whenever. And it's just not going to happen with the ANC. However, I don't think, having said that, maybe this is me just being pessimistic, but at least my understanding of South African society is that if there's a split in the ANC, I don't think that's going to mean that the ANC is necessarily going to lose the next election. There's been many splits from the ANC. I don't think we should put our hopes on, this major breakaway, this Magashule Zuma faction is going to break away and split the ANC in half. We saw what happened with the UDM under Bantu Olamisa. We saw what happened with COPE. The EFF made a little bit, they made some sense of a split, but it was more around Malema's personality. I think there are other reasons why people keep voting for the ANC, including things like brand power and historic reasons and so forth. And I don't think, and this is the point I'm trying to get to, is we shouldn't put our hopes on some form of a government solution once we get the ANC out of power. The ANC is probably going to remain in power, and even if the ANC gets kicked out of power, that doesn't by definition mean that these government problems are going to go away.
Absolutely. It's about the ideas and winning people really on that battlefield of ideas, and use that expression. And Chris, this is why I want to come to you, because, for instance, Kuro for me has opened up a door for me to prosecute this battle of how you could reshape the education environment in a country like ours to actually create that generation. As Adam said, you've got to get the education right. And for me, part of that solution is, how do you best allow poor people to bypass the state and the unions, who are Tommies with a lot of our politicians? And one of the best ways you can do that, of course, is to introduce the market into something like education, something that historically so far has been enjoyed by the middle class and rich people, i.e. private schooling. You can actually devolve down to poorer people so that they also become beneficiaries of it. And the state's role, insofar as poor people, can be to relinquish spending that 20 grand per pupil itself as the state, but rather give that cash by way of a voucher to a parent. Am I being a crazy right-winger with this idea, even though we're seeing the shoots of it being possibly possible, i.e. Kuro and Sparks, the Sparks School Network, for example?
Well, you being a crazy right-winger and us having options in education, the two things aren't mutually exclusive. So be very clear. I think, look, the much maligned profit motive inevitably works. And by work, I mean delivering results. And it's also simply moral, giving parents the agency to choose where to send their kids. So as Ernst mentioned, the fiscal cliff of South Africa, if the government still wants to be involved in some sort of service delivery, it has to realize it has to let go of most of its SOEs, and it can still provide some services, but it has to give parents options. It has to give them the agency to vote for the best schools that deliver the best education for their children. This isn't to say that it's going to be the same level of education as a Hilton College or a Michael House, but it will be better than it currently is, and it's all relative at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a case of just opening it up. But again, you run into the problem of fear and hubris. So the fear is if you open up education, then people will vote differently. That's the line. And the hubris in terms of the state should be dictating the values, the ideas, the ideology that children get taught. So you have to fight up against those two forces. It's something big to fight against. I think you chip away at it. Don't expect results overnight. You can look at Soltech, for example. These things get built over time. It's very easy to tear down institutions and societies and that kind of thing, but the building, the hard work takes time. So these sorts of discussions, what various organizations do, that's part of the long-term work, and hopefully you'll see the good results from it.
Absolutely.
I want to add to that the
you
privatization
have to be quite brief, Hugo. Sorry,
okay.
I have to just add that because we literally have only 3 minutes left.
Okay, just quickly, the privatization of education is an international phenomenon as well. People are losing faith in universities because they are turning out crazy, stupid candidates. And you're finding, for example, parents that are experimenting homeschooling. Homeschooling is shot through the roof in the United States, for example. In France, Macron tried to ban parents from having homeschooled their children last year. Okay, so governments always go for children because you get them young, you get them early, basically. And I think worldwide we are, as I say, I think we're living in transformative times. Really, I want to see this conversation in 10 years. I want to know if we still have a South Africa. I don't believe we will.
Well, it's funny you bring that one up because the next topic I wanted to bring up, but we've run out of time, guys, is the new Zulu King and what sort of ideas we would have pushed to him, if we had him here as maybe one of the bubbles on screen, for reform in the Zulu world. I, for one, am big on independence and really property rights. But again, run out of time, guys. It will be something I take on the show as I head to Zululand to prosecute this issue in those communities. And we'll hear from ordinary Zulus when they hear these ideas as to whether they'll be amenable to them, and of course, putting them to the new king. But shout out, Baete, Kwena, Inkos Encha, Mrs. Zulu, I'm very happy that we have a new king. I just had to say that, and Hebe Usuki for that.
Are we seeing you in your traditional Zulu attire on this show?
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of people don't know this about me because they're so used to hearing people say, oh, he likes whites and blah, blah, blah. He wants to be white. And I'm like, guys, I'm a proud Zulu. I don't think people understand how culturally, how proud I am. But this is not about me. Let me end the show. Guys, thank you very much. Maybe a final word from everybody, how we can reach you, and two things. What will you be looking at out for in the news week ahead? The issues you'll be looking out for. Be brief, guys, and how we reach you on your socials or where you write. Usually, Chris, I'll begin with you.
Thank you very much, Sikhle, and to the fellow panelists. A pleasure to always speak to you, Sikhle, and I learned a lot from the fellow panelists this evening. You can find all of my articles, research at www.freemarketfoundation.com. You can also find articles and research by our other employees, our associates, our commentators, all there. Also at therationalstandard.com. And just in terms of what I'll be looking at for the next week or two, the FMF will be doing a submission on the National Data and Cloud Policy, which is another quite ridiculous policy coming from government, as they tend to be. And also we're looking at the Fiscal Responsibility Bill, which was something I think very good, put forward by Jordan Hill-Lewis from the Democratic Alliance, which the FMF will be commenting on. Those are the main things at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother. Hugo, what will you be looking at in the coming week, and how do the people reach you?
Okay, they can reach me. I've got a YouTube channel. My name Hugo, and it's Kruger. It's got the 2 dots on both of them. Other than that, I'm not on social media or anything of the sort. I've deleted all of it. I think it's from the devil. I don't want it anymore. Other than that, yeah, I write for different articles for different publications sometimes. And but now it's European summer, so please don't contact me. Don't do anything. Don't share my number. I'm gonna go to Greece and I'm gonna have a very nice holiday while because I've been freezing for the last 3 months while you guys
Shout
are
out
having
to
it.
you, my
Thank you.
brother. Nzuzo, what are some of the things you'll be looking out for in the coming week, maybe on the Manpatria show, and how do people reach you?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I'm going to be looking forward to the judgment in Costa in the Northwest. That's going to be interesting. I've been trying to get hold of the previous orders, but since Ernst himself is also dealing with that, Ernst, I'd like to also get in contact with you guys at Afriforum, so we can also get a judgment and work on that as well. But yeah, besides that, hopefully, hopefully the death of the ANC this week. But I think I'm just hoping too much. But nonetheless, yeah, Costa Judgment, and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, Nzuzo Khathi, and you can also find me on the Manpatria podcast. And please, guys, if you have any legal needs in terms of property specifically, please come and visit us at Ivanpoint Partners in Pretoria, in Linwood, and we'd like to really help you guys in terms of your legal needs. But yeah, if you guys want to chat with me, you can hit me up on Facebook and Instagram, and then after join us this week on Manpatria. Thank you.
Oh, sounds like your audio is off, or is it mine? Can you guys hear me? Ah,
yeah.
I can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me
there
now?
we go.
My bad.
Yes.
What are some of the things you're going to be looking out for this week? And of course, how do the folks reach you?
Well, they can reach me through Afriforum and under my own name as well on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and YouTube as well. In the next few weeks, there's something that we are looking at currently. We will publish a paper or a discussion paper about the whole issue of civil disobedience, which I think is something that's going to become an increasingly important thing in South Africa. We've touched on it today, and I think it's a topic that we should open up, and it's a risky topic, and we should be responsible in how we approach it. But it's at least something that we should talk about, because if we don't talk about it, that people have already started engaging with this. We saw it with the e-tolls and we saw it with the lockdown. So I think we should talk about that more. And then there are a bunch of stuff regarding EWC and so forth that we're also going to publish, some papers that we've been working on. And then, of course, I think the most important thing for the coming week is, of course, Costa, definitely, which will be on Tuesday. And surely, we'd gladly stay in touch and keep, share whatever information we have, and we need to spread the word.
Absolutely. Fellas, thank you so much for joining me on the show. A reminder to you, dear viewer, please, before you leave, just hit that like button. It really does help get the show out. Fellas, thank you very much to every single one of you. And thank you, dear viewer, for watching this show, this episode of Liberty and Friends. I come to you every Sunday at 8 p.m. This should be your premiere week-ending show as we look at the news week that was. Guys, if you want to support the show, and shout out to you, Devin Nair, first-time viewer, welcome to it. If you want to support the show, guys, I really do encourage it. Just check out the descriptor in the video. It really does help. It gets me out to these locations to bring you episodes, for example, on the BDL show. There's 2 issues that I want to travel for in order to produce an episode. One is the Zulu Kingdom. Is there space for reform now that there is a new king? I want to speak to ordinary Zulus in Zululand to get their views as to what sort of reforms they want to see. Property rights, maybe even a more independent Zululand. And the other issue, of course, is to launch the Mazakele campaign, traveling around the country, producing episodes of fellow South Africans who have chosen to do things for themselves, and bringing that content to the rest of South Africa, who I believe as Ernst was just saying now, there's scope for South Africans doing things for themselves. So guys, I appreciate any contributions. It helps me get around the country and hire things like camera and sound and blah, blah, blah. But check out the descriptors in the video and you can find out how you can contribute. Guys, hit that like button. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. I will see you on Wednesday for the Big Daddy Liberty show. And of course, next week for Liberty and Friends. Remember, never trust a commie.